You likely have forgotten about this now, but at Survivor Series 2002, 5 championships, 5 changed hands. Can you imagine if that happened today? Internet wrestling community stomping around going, from this I'm going to cancel the WWE Network. And then 24 hours later, you would tune into Raw. It also features what was at the time the most expensive structure in wrestling history. I am of course talking about the Elimination Chamber, and it cost a legitimate $500,000 to construct. And this isn't like the Elimination Chamber we know today. This was an absolutely horrid creation that was actually designed to hurt people, even though that's not the point of pro wrestling. I mean, go and watch anyone who competed in this first one, be it in the actual match or when they're talking about it afterwards. You can see it in their eyes. They're all like, well, I didn't particularly enjoy myself. I think we could have come up with a better way. So it's like being thrown on death. As we all know, nobody wants to be thrown on death. The atmosphere also rocks as it's from Madison Square Garden. And on this night, the New York crowd has decided that this is the most important thing they've ever seen in their damn lives, and they're going to scream their lungs out. And further proof of this was when it came to the live gate, which was the highest in pro wrestling American history, unless it had the word WrestleMania written above the marquee. Hot damn. Even with all this though, the pay-per-view has far more significance because it is the last time that Shawn Michaels, a hot right kid, won a world championship. And that's a very controversial point today, because there are some people out there like, how the hell did he not obtain any more? He was one of the best, he was one of the greatest ever. We should have decorated him like a pumpkin. What's even more mad is that this was only his second match back after his 4-year hiatus. Obviously, he had the absolutely barn burner with Triple H at SummerSlam, and then he was competing here. And yet all anybody wants to talk about, you included right now, is yes, Shawn Michaels' weird brown poo pants. I don't know why he decided to wear them, but really, like, you see them, you're like, they're pretty bad, but I don't know why we're still talking about it almost 2 decades later. I think we can get over it. Triple H was also a victim of this structure because he got taken to the hospital after the fact, after Rob Van Dam had gone for a frog splash and quite literally crushed his larynx and crushed his throat. How the hell did he carry on wrestling for another, around about 32 minutes? The local medical facility also actually wanted to keep him in for 2 nights, but you know that's not how it works. He was in there Sunday, woke up Monday, went, oh, it's Raw is War, so he went to the show. I mean, a wrestler would have to be losing every single limb not to attend Raw, although he didn't show up because he was so injured. And actually, we didn't see him for a few more weeks. Overall as well, when we're talking about behind the scenes, there was also some worries that maybe Vince McMahon was focusing too much on the spectacle, too much on toilet humor, and also not enough of the idea of long-term storytelling. And how terrifying is it to say things that were happening in 2002 and then go, it's still going on in 2020. It was all this that led to Paul Heyman turning on Brock Lesnar on this evening to align himself with the Big Show. And yeah, that ties into everything I just said. It was all about shock, it was all about excitement. And to be fair, Brock Lesnar had just been getting cheered here, so Vince had gone, you know what? We should make him a babyface. And that confused me. If we don't do that now, why not? We're also going to get into Scott Steiner's return to the WWE, which is absolutely flippin' hilarious. But for now, let's take all our finger of powers and up those downs for Survivor Series 2002, voted by you. The opening match is bonkers, and I mean bonkers. It is the bizarre team of Bubba Ray Dudley, Spike Dudley, and Jeff Hardy taking on 3-Minute Warning and Rico, and that felt like it was just pulled out of a hat. And I am pretty sure that everybody in this match just wanted to die. It was a tables elimination match which tied into all this madness that Vince McMahon had been trying to create, and these poor 6 guys gave you every single thing they had in their bodies. Because of that, this is getting up. It is just the most non-stop thing you have ever seen in your life. It's kind of like the first time you have sex, not to lower the tone. But because you don't really know what you're doing, you just rely on speed and effort and hope that everything works out. I suppose it does at the time, but afterwards you're not really sure what you've achieved. I have no idea what we're talking about. But also, Jeff Hardy, poor Jeff Hardy flubbed me. Why does he have to put himself in these positions every single time he wrestles? When he has a table thrown right into his head, it just explodes like his brain has just fallen on the floor. And then, of course, to try and recreate everything he had done at the Royal Rumble 2000 in Madison Square Garden, he climbs up just to the highest point in the world and he throws himself onto a bunch of people that happen to be on tables. You can check out Retro Ups and Downs for Royal Rumble 2000. And if you had told me back then that Jeff Hardy would still be wrestling 2 years later, I would not have believed you. I would have assumed he was just Mr. Injury. So everybody has been hurled through some wood at some point, which leaves us with Bubba Ray Dudley and Rico. And once again, you're like, how is Rico doing so well? And it's the finish that actually makes this quite glorious, because after months of splitting them up during the brand split, Devon Dudley, who before this had just been a reverend, and don't ask me why, he just decided to do that one day, runs down the aisle, he's dressed in Dudley gear, they get back together, they 3D Rico through a table, the crowd goes absolutely ballistic. This is actually a very nice moment. That finishing move was so devastating too that afterwards, Rico had bits of table and just other debris stuck in his arm and stuck in his body, so think how hard they must have thrown him through it. Look, I knew this was coming, and even I got goosebumps like some kind of moron, but that's just how good it is. I will never understand why WWE broke them up in the first place, other than the fact they have this edict that, oh, you're a tag team, we have to separate you and turn them into single stars. It's annoying. It was utter carnage though, and in that sense, there is no way not to enjoy it, but you will be terrified the whole time, once again, like when you lose your virginity. I'm gonna drop it. We then cut to WWE New York, or the World as it was known in 2002, for a live performance by Saliva, which brings us to a very first here on Ups and Downs, because I've never done this. I genuinely mean it, I've never done it, but I did it here. I skipped it. I don't want to watch Saliva when I've tuned in to see the Survivor Series pay-per-view and I want to see some wrestling. I never think that works, unless of course they're playing somebody's entrance music live, which they do later, but they weren't doing it here. It goes on for about 75 hours down. Whoever was going to have to follow this match as well did have a massive problem. I'm not talking about following Saliva. Anybody could have done that. You could have wheeled out a goat on a bike and gone, look at the goat. But no, basically, Billy Kidman and Jamie Noble then came out to have a cruiserweight title match. And the audience, the fans, they were so worn out because they'd seen 72,000 people being thrown through tables. They're like, do we want to see some flippy shit right now? Not massively. And it makes the first 3/4 of this so awkward because it's silence. It's like we're at a funeral or like they've just been told the worst news ever. Because of that, down. I mean, it's like somebody walking in on you when you're masturbating and you can just feel the badness in the room. Don't know why I'm making so many sexual references, but with all that said, Jamie Noble is one hell of a talented professional wrestler, Billy Kidman was one hell of a talented professional wrestler, and everyone used to love him back in WCW and here in WWE, and if you remove everything around this and just watch the match, it is pretty damn good. You also have the pairing of Noble and Nydia, who we've talked about here before on Retro Ups and Downs, and they just have such good chemistry. And honestly, some of the things they did here. Jamie Noble gave Billy Kidman a top rope DDT, and Kidman sells it like every single bone in his body has just gone, nah, we don't want to work anymore. It was here when the fans actually started to care, because how could you not? And of course, Nydia kept getting involved, which meant when Billy Kidman did go for his shooting star press and she got on the apron, he just booted her right in the head. 2002 WWE is very different. He then hits that shooting star press, which has to be the most, well, he doesn't look in control of it, even though 9 times out of 10 he did hit it. He pins Jamie Noble, and there you go. There's a title change number 1. He's your brand new cruiserweight champ. With a hot crowd, this would have been super duper fun times, but even as it was still good. We then cut back to backstage, and Kurt Angle was watching this, and he is absolutely disgusted that Billy Kidman has just claimed a championship. However, he then decides this must be good luck to him and tag team partner Chris Benoit, because they are going to win the tag team titles later. Not quite, and this is strange logic, but that's what he thought. Benoit then got mad because Angle said that he was the team captain, and this had been the story up to this point. These two couldn't get on the same page, although I do need to say that Benoit's reactions here were a little bit like welcome to my first play, and after Kurt had got offended again, because Chris Benoit wanted to do a handshake, he hugged him, and it all looked like everything was gonna be okay. No. We also saw Chris Jericho wrapping his wrists and punching some plastic. Don't ask me, I don't know. Next up was a hardcore match for the Women's Championship between Trish Stratus and Victoria. Now, I had no recollection of this, mostly because in the early 2000s, what every single female performer in WWE was told was, please don't wrestle like the men, we just want you to roll around the place. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, but that's what they said. Trish was the champion, Victoria the challenger, so you already know what's going to happen, we mentioned it earlier, but what you definitely didn't predict is that beforehand, we saw some strange security footage of Victoria talking to a mirror where she said, "Mirror, who's the prettiest of them all?" And then she thought the mirror had said Trish Stratus, so she freaked the hell out. Okay. There was actually some inventive stuff in this, because at one point they took trash cans and just shoved them in every single corner and started hurling each other into them, and you could just tell that they were desperate to be taken seriously, and they really did kick each other's ass. At one point there was an ironing board in the ring, because it's women and WWE in 2002, but soon after that, Trish had a kendo stick, and some of the shots she was slamming Victoria with, I was like, ow, that's hurting me, which is doubly impressive, because this went down 18 years ago. Victoria had a busted nose at one point, and I wasn't surprised, and then very sadly, this is where it all fell apart, because Trish Stratus goes for a bulldog, and it just completely misses. Like, the only way you could justify it is if you'd said, oh, a ghost came up, and he got in the way, and then during the finish, when Victoria tries to use the fire extinguisher, it doesn't work. They start sort of scrapping over it for way too long. You can tell that something's gone wrong. It makes you feel all oogly boogly in your tummy. Finally, Vicky does get it to work, and that allows her to pin Trish after a vertical suplex. And I actually felt really sorry for these two. First half was really good, and second half, it just went down the pan. So we gotta be honest, we gotta be transparent. It is still somewhat of an enjoyable watch. But yeah, when you get to those last few minutes, it's kind of like you've been caught with your pants down. Did it again, down. Booker T was then shown warming up backstage, and Eric Bischoff cut a promo when he reminded us that the Elimination Chamber was his idea. So in the word of kayfabe and in the word of WWE storytelling, you can never get around that. The man who was responsible for WCW also came up with this nightmare. Big Show then arrived and yelled at Eric Bischoff, because why the hell not? And we saw Paul Heyman very, very worried about the fact that Brock Lesnar was going to be defending his championship next. And Heyman may as well have had a giant sign here that said, I am definitely going to screw this man over. You could just see the guilty look on his face. It was then, I suppose, the most important match of the night so far, because the WWE title was on the line as champion Brock Lesnar was taking on the Big Show. And if you can believe it, this barely went 5 minutes. And just to give you some context, the hardcore women's match went 7 minutes, so I was a bit like, huh. But then I remembered, Brock Lesnar has been doing this ever since. It always works. Did you really want to see Big Show and Brock Lesnar go longer than this? No? I actually think it played to all of their strengths. The whole story here was that Big Show had wrecked Brock's ribs, so he was struggling with everything, but he was still able to German suplex Big Show, and while this was about as attractive as my face, it still made me scream out loud, how is he this strong? That's not a rhetorical question. I want it written down on a piece of paper and sent to my house. How is Brock Lesnar this strong? And I'll read it and go, finally, oodle alley. Within 2 minutes, the referee had been bumped, which goes to show, even though we were moving away from the Attitude Era, that whole remit was still in everybody's mind. But I don't think the Beast realised, because he then grabbed Big Show and gave him an overhead belly to belly. And seriously, this is so impressive. The fans just come alive. They can't believe what they've seen, and neither could I. Even Rey Mysterio with his one eye would have been impressed. It got more impressive as Brock then F5'd the Big Show as if he was an ant. So the Ant Show, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, that's the worst thing ever. And this, of course, is when you realise why the official had been knocked down. Because a second referee comes out, he's about to count the 1, 2, 3. Paul Heyman grabs his leg, pulls him out the ring, and as it turns out, he has betrayed his client, and the advocate is now in the corner of Mr. Show. Brock did the whole wrestling shock face because he couldn't believe this had happened. Then Big Show appeared from nowhere, gave him a choke slam onto a chair and a trash can and about 72,000 other weapons, and did indeed, if you can believe it, even in 2020, pin Brock Lesnar to become not only the WWE champion, but another client, another person, another friend of Mr. Heyman. Those two cowards then just legged it out of the arena and got in a car that was waiting for them. Every time wrestling does that, I'm like, this wouldn't happen. Some criminal would pass the car and go, well, someone's just left their keys in, and they'd drive off, and then think how silly you'd look and feel. The crowd was well into this turn though. They couldn't believe that Mr. ECW had done this, and this was the start of Brock Lesnar's first ever babyface turn, so that's quite exciting. Also thought it worked on every single level. I enjoyed the roller coaster. Stand up. We then had the most 2002 match ever because it was Los Guerreros taking on Edge and Rey Mysterio, who were also taking on Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle. This, my friends, was fire. Stand up. Edge and Rey were the tag team champions. When I saw all of this, I also pondered, is this the most serious WWE has ever taken their tag team division? Because listen to all the names I just said. It is utterly redonkulous. Of course, the story was that Angle and Benoit hated each other. Edge and Rey were best friends, whereas Eddie and Chavo couldn't give two hoots about anybody else, and they were only going to do what was best for them. which is why for a large chunk of the opening of this match, they just stood back, they let these other 4 idiots wear themselves out, and every time they saw an opportunity, they were like, well, hey, let's get involved. It was an elimination match too, to try and tie into the theme of the evening, and if you can believe it, Angle and Benoit were the first team out of there, and boy, how did the live crowd not like that. Edge pinned Benoit following the spear after Chavo had smashed Chris with the world title belt and then thrown it into Kurt Angle's hands, which of course meant when Chris did turn around after he had recovered, he was like, I can't believe it. I thought we were friends, and they argued to the back. I always love that spot. It makes me laugh every single time. And the real stupid thing here is that they did this right in front of the ref. Like, the referee was just watching this, but he didn't care. I suppose he was having a good time too. The final 2 teams then went at it, and okay, there were a few shaky spots here, but it also has Rey Mysterio just flying around the place, and he has to be the MVP of Retro Ups and Downs. He is on 90% of these shows, and he never has a bad performance. The guy is so flippin' talented. He gets absolutely screwed though, because once again, Chavo uses the belt and just smashes him right in the back, which allows Eddie to lock in the La Paso submission, or the El Paso, whatever it's called. Mysterio taps out clean, and once again, we have brand new tag team champions, Eddie Guerrero and Cousin Chavo. The funniest part was how mad the crowd were after Angle and Benoit got kicked out of there, especially because for one reason or another, they just didn't like Edge, so they booed him as if they'd just been kicked out of a kid's party. I loved it. What I did not love is that we then saw Al Wilson and Dawn Marie in the crowd. And I'm sure at one point we'll have a more pertinent show to discuss that relationship. But if you're now thinking to yourself, well, I'm sure it didn't end when Al Wilson had a heart attack and died during sex, well, you need to rethink that statement. Let's just move on. Okay, right, so if wrestling is all about sports entertaining you and putting smiles on people's faces, then what came next may be the best thing to ever happen since the first man, woman, child, whatever, walked on this damn earth, and I mean it. Chris Nowinski, he of Tough Enough and these days concussion famed, is out here just to tell New York that they suck. He is then joined by Matt Hardy, who agrees, yes, I do think they're losers, and to call a spade, this goes on way too long. I think the reason for that is because WWE was trying to build suspense, because we did indeed have a returning superstar. Because from nowhere an ambulance siren started to sound, which still affects me to this day. When I hear one, I think of this man instantly, and Scott Steiner finally made his big comeback to World Wrestling Entertainment. It had been 8 years since he was last in the promotion, and since then he'd gone to WCW in Japan and all over the place, and he is just so riled up, he is so amped that he absolutely runs through Chris Nowinski and Matt Hardy like a knife through butter. I mean, when he throws Matt Hardy out the ring onto Chris Nowinski, he ain't trying to protect him at all. In fact, I think he's trying to hurl him through the floor. The reaction to this is absolutely insane too, and if you've never seen it, you have to change it now. And just to give you an idea of how terrified WWE was about its business, they didn't actually want to bring Steiner in. They thought he was injury prone, they thought he was kind of crazy, which he kind of is, but because numbers were going down, they were like, somebody better call the big booty daddy. The absolute best bit though, is that when it's time for him to cut his "Hey, I'm here" promo and he can't find a microphone, Scott Steiner shouts so loud that it's picked up by all the cameras, "Give me a mic." You have to go and see it. It is superb, it is brilliant, it will be with me until the day I die, and because of that, it is getting it up. 18 years later, and I'm still chuckling about this, 18 years later. I mean, you could have given birth to a child, and now they'd be considered an adult. What absolutely sucks, though, is if you do decide to watch this on the WWE Network, they've cut it out. Now, obviously, I used the means of the internet to make sure that I did see it, and I did get a good chuckle, but they shouldn't have done that. And I get it, he says a swear word, but it's so damn entertaining, you gotta bring it back. I ain't standing for it. Down. But then you get a bunch of promos from Triple H and Eric Bischoff again, and everybody else is gonna be in the Elimination Chamber. But you also see Randy Orton, who is continuing on his injury storyline after debuting and then, yes, getting injured. And if you want to see how terrifying time is, just go and check this out. He looks about 4 years old. But yes, the point is, of course, it was time for our main event. It was time for the Elimination Chamber. And you can just see how horrible this thing is, especially when you compare it to the modern one. It has been built to maim, and these poor 6 guys are about to have their asses kicked. However, it is quite the halabalaz is getting it up. It did see champion Triple H taking on RVD, Shawn Michaels, Kane, Booker T, and Chris Jericho, And the whole thing is just dangerous. From second one to second whatever it goes on to, you can just see that this is not a good idea. Triple H is also busted open around about the time it takes you to blink an eye. And then of course he's struggling because he has his throat crushed. And that's what I mean about this being nothing but bad news. Nothing is going right. Everybody's getting hurt. And yet somehow you can't stop watching like it's a car crash. Some of the bumps that Van Damme takes as well are genuinely sick. Like you can hear his back just thumping into the steel, and it makes you feel absolutely terrible. It's why when he did actually go out of there first after a missile drop kick by Booker T, and the live crowd didn't like that one, but I was a bit like, thank goodness, otherwise who knows what would have happened. Straight after this, Kane is here, and he just grabs Jericho and chucks him through one of the pods, all that plexiglass, and that looked like it sucked as well. I mean, Y2J comes up from this with blood all over him, and I was like, is that fake or is it real? It could be either. He was still able to get back into it and get rid of Booker T after the Lion Salt, and then because Kane is really big, there's a big red machine, he gets Sweet Chin Music, he gets pedigreed, and he gets Lion Salted, and that's the only way we're able to say goodbye. Because if you're over 6'5" in WWE, you have to be pulverized before you get pinned. HBK was then also bleeding like this was the NWA in the late 80s, and then just to remind you that he and Triple H are better than everybody else, not only does Shawn Michaels kick out of the Lion Salt, which by the way nobody else in this match was allowed to do, but Triple H gets locked in the walls of Jericho for honestly around about 12 hours, but he never taps. It all ends up with Jericho getting super kicked by Shawn Michaels and 1, 2, 3, and this is when the fans go absolutely crazy because they look at the scenario and go, wait, Triple H is the champion and Shawn Michaels is the challenger and they're the last two. You're not gonna tell me that they're gonna change the title? But you were correct. So when he does do that after kicking out of one pedigree, after blocking another one and then hitting Sweet Chin Music, it's one of those things you'll never forget if you saw it live. And WWE played this up massively. They had confetti coming from the ceiling and JR going, my God, this is the best thing ever. Within this sort of few seconds, you actually think that maybe it is, until you realize that you're not Shawn Michaels, you're just a random guy watching it on TV. But it was a big deal. It was, especially because it was only his second match back, and somehow he hadn't lost a step, he hadn't lost a beat. That's because he is Shawn Michaels, and he's one of the best in-ring performers ever. The controversy was that he lost it back to Triple H only a month later at Armageddon, following a 3 Stages of Hell match. But I'm not going to get upset about that now. It's 2020, and I have plenty of modern problems I have to sort. Like the fact Chad Gable continues to get booked into oblivion. But I'll tell you this, when it comes to Survivor Series 2020, actually a manic, but a very watchable show. Now, don't forget to leave a comment below and make your suggestions for next week Retro Ups and Downs. People keep getting in touch with me directly saying, Miller, do this. No, you put it in the comments and whatever gets upvoted the most goes into the poll. You then vote on the poll. This show is made for you. Then like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, head over to WhatCulture.com, read yourself some articles, follow WhatCulture on Twitter, WhatCulture WWE, and watch more videos here on WhatCulture Wrestling. Especially Retro Ups and Downs. My name is Steiner from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for watching as always. I'm now gonna go and bust some ghosts. If only I don't have a proton pack. That sucks. See you soon.